Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Musings from the Mount podcast, where we explore the intersection of spirituality, psychology, and global consciousness. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In today's episode, Michael Lindfield joins, and we're diving into a question that affects all of us. How do we measure the health of a nation? We challenge traditional metrics and explore new ways of assessing societal well-being. From personal responsibility to collective action, we uncover the hidden connections between individual choices and national health. Get ready to rethink your role in creating a healthier, more unified world as we begin our journey towards wholeness. And if you like this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We are incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Now, back to the podcast and the health of a nation. When we look at the health of a system, any system, whether it's a person, a country, a computer, a car, there's metrics that we use to measure the health of the system. It gets a little more confusing when we think about the health of something as vast as a country. It's been sort of hypothesized that humans were evolved to develop around in groups of about 150. That for most people, that's about the most you can kind of keep track of, is about 150 people. And we're in a country of 370 million people. And now we're connected to all these people across the world. We're connected to 8 billion people across the world. How do we take the temperature, and 144? How do we take the temperature? How do we monitor the code that we run on as a country? If we consider a country an idea, and a country has an ethos, it has, we've talked about the different rays and the different personalities of country. How do we take that temperature, and how do we even determine what it is that we're measuring?
This is so important, Joey, because we're looking at the health, not just of an individual or a nation, but of the whole world, human society. And because we are an integral aspect of the planet, what we do affects the health and well-being of the total planetary being. So let's define healthy system. You mentioned with your opening words, the healthy system. A healthy system for me is one in which there is a free, unimpeded circulation and flow of life energy, whether you call it qi from the Chinese medicine perspective, whether you call it the lifeblood. It is the free circulation of life, because that free circulation ensures that the lifeblood touches all parts, goes to all parts. It's not cut off from any one part. So anytime an aspect of myself, of my body, of my feelings, my thoughts are separated out, they cannot be touched by the lifeblood that circulates around the greater system. So for me, when I look at what is the cause of disease or an unhealthy body, in my case, I look at where's the blockage? Where is the blockage? The blockage can be in the distribution system, i.e., not everybody is getting enough food, not everybody is getting enough shelter, the basic Maslow needs. So I could measure that. And you drew the parallel immediately about how do you measure, the health of a nation. Well, we could look at different lenses. Why don't we start with the one that we're sort of already going down this track? Many times when we hear the State of the Union, or we hear an economic forecast for the coming year, we talk about GDP. Gross domestic product.
Right.
A product, that means what we've produced. Back in the 1970s, we had this kingdom of Bhutan up in the Himalayas, that it was very peaceful. It's very secluded, and it safeguards its borders because it wants to maintain the integrity of its own ethos, if you like, or its own principles. It started to say that GDP is not how you measure the wealth of a nation. It's GNH, gross national happiness. Now, for some people, it sounds, oh, this is just pie in the sky. This is very flowery language.
Yeah.
But they say, no, it isn't. If you look at gross national happiness, and if you go back to, for instance, the whole notion of what someone like Aristotle was saying, then happiness is at the root of everything. And so that's what they started to measure. And they were looking for a new economic paradigm because they said you cannot measure the wealth of a nation simply through its GDP. And back in the 1980s, when I was living in the Findhorn community in Scotland, we organized a conference on the new economy. And one of the speakers was a Chilean, he was of German descent, called Manfred Max Neef. And he'd done a lot of work on this gross national happiness. And he started off his talk by saying, I don't believe in GDP, in measuring the health of a nation. When I get off the airplane and walk into the city of any country I'm visiting, I look into the eyes of the people, and I can tell you whether it's a healthy and wealthy nation.
Mm-hmm. That's
just by the sparkle in their eyes, the inspiration filled with spirit, whether it feels happy, whether it feels safe. Mm-hmm. He said, you can pick it up, you can register it. You don't need the GDP. The GDP will tell you production figures, but it won't tell you the state of being of those that produce.
That's right.
And that's the missing link. We're measuring with the wrong measures.
Mm-hmm. Which is going to become increasingly more important as the push towards automation. It's just measuring what you produce is going to be there's going to be quite a chasm between production and overall well-being. And I think that's something we need to focus on as we enter this truly new era of human and machine intelligence.
Yeah, so this is a vast subject, and we can look at it through different lenses. We could look at it like the state of a nation. We could look at the USA and how healthy are we now? What's the state of our body, not just the body politic, but our society?
Yeah.
It's one thing to go and visit a city and go and see their baseball team play or their football team play. But if you go walk the streets and see how many homeless there are, or how many addicts there are, how many people who are just in dire straits. Dire straits.
Like how does a group of people, whether it's a city or a country or a state, look after those who are, least capable of taking care of themselves?
Do we deny that they're part of our population?
Yeah. And it's certainly this glaring unredeemed aspect of our body politic.
So for me, sickness is caused by these two things. One is a blockage. The other is inadvertently poisoning the system by how we think and how we behave. Yeah.
Yeah, we create our own toxic energy. I've been experiencing that quite a bit. Watching a good friend of mine, her sister died, and watching how is it rippled through their family, and how in moments of crisis like that, or moments what brings out both the best and the worst in everyone. Which is a way of saying that it brings out all the unredeemed aspects, all the traumas, and it's all and you see everyone acting unskillfully, and from a sense of perhaps ego. I've noticed it in these times where there seems to be more weight towards being right rather than being correct. So, and that's just something I've noticed, especially living here in California. When we talk about homelessness, we have a deep struggle with the difference between being right and being correct. Like doing the right thing versus doing the actual correct thing. And so, and that's an interesting way, because it's a metric that you can easily measure it. And we struggle with it here, because we want to do the right thing, but it turns out we don't often do the correct thing.
So what is a health crisis? A health crisis is when the state of our body, the state of our union, is not in union.
Right, yeah.
It's a state of disunion. It's a health crisis.
Right.
It's a state of disconnect. And it's a wake-up call. We can either take it as a wake-up call, or we can try to run away from it or try to medicate ourselves, try to deny it.
Right.
However, it really is an opportunity to face up to exactly what you just said, Joey, the unredeemed aspects.
Yeah.
The unredeemed aspects are part of the blocks in the system. They're the crystallizations that block the channels.
Yeah, like the lactic acid in your muscles, and you know.
Oh, yeah, I know that as a runner, and you know that as an athlete. Yeah, lactic acid buildup. Absolutely. Well, we've got negative psychic acid buildup.
Right.
And one of the things I've described before when I talked about the environmental crisis, particularly back in the 1970s and 80s, when we were first noticing the effects of the industrial, if you like, way of life on European forests. We talked about the German forest, the Schwarzenwald, the Black Forest. Well, the Black Forest was turning yellow because the whole pH was being shifted. It didn't have the situation, the healthy environment that it needed. So what we are realizing is that everything that we do has a corresponding effect at the densest level. So if I think negative thoughts about myself, if I have fear and doubt and self-loathing, I'm creating chemicals inside of myself that are released inside my body. If I start thinking bad thoughts about you, Joey, I am poisoning your psychic field with my chemicals, my bad chemicals.
Yeah.
That's for real.
Yeah, it is.
And then we go, hey, we got a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
Well, how do you clean up a toxic relationship?
Well, if you start out where in everything, you have to start off on your side of the street, and you have to start off with the things that I'm reminded of, like the Serenity Prayer. So you have to first determine what are the things that you can control, what are the things that you can change, and you immediately start there. So like in this kind of sense, you have a degree of control over your own thinking, over your own reactions, over your own actions, and so we start there.
Well, and thank you. And this is where we put the emphasis in several of these podcasts back on stewardship of the ecosystem of self.
Right.
Each one of us is responsible for this whole universe of lives, which is who we are, this incarnated soul called Joey and Michael, and every other name that we're given. That ecosystem of self is ours to steward. So how do we take care of our own ecosystem of self? By being kind to it. I go back to gross national happiness in Bhutan. Bhutan is a Buddhist country. And if I was to sort of summarize the Buddhist teaching about how you create this happiness, it's to only think, say, and do that which is kind, helpful, and true. That's a little phrase that I came up with just to remind me. Only think, say, and do that which is kind, helpful, and true, which means I'm not putting out toxic emissions.
Right.
We talk about emissions from cars, CO, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
We are emitting every time we think a thought. It has a corresponding psychic emission. And then when that precipitates, when that densifies, it becomes an actual chemical.
Right.
If I think happy thoughts about you and me and life in general, I oxygenate my blood. Joy is an oxygenator of the blood. If I am bitter about life, I'm bitter about you, that bitterness may accumulate somewhere and crystallize and calcify, and I got kidney stones or gallstones because it's crystallized gall.
Yeah, we really don't realize that. It's one of the first processes when you go down the path of becoming more mindful. I mean, you really don't realize we're not trained. This is not something that's obvious, especially in the way that our culture is, the way that Western civilization is. We're not predisposed to monitoring our own energy and how it affects people, how it radiates, and internally how it manifests.
Well, also because we haven't been trained about nutrition properly. And I'm not just pointing the finger at the fast food industry, although I am pointing the finger at the fast food industry because there's a knock-on effect of all the hamburgers. It means you clear the rainforest to have cattle grazing. And it's said that 1 pound of beef or meat is equivalent to the 7 of grains. So it takes 7 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat. Well, if we were to eat grains, we wouldn't have a food shortage. And there are anyway, we don't go into nutrition now, but you have to understand it in all its aspects. And so if I look at what we put into our body, and this is like fast foods, I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm saying, are you aware of the effects of what you're putting inside your system? If you are steward, you have to be, as you say, a mindful steward. Are you mindful of the effects of what you're putting in your system?
Yeah,
Do you know what it does to you?
Yeah, I find it amazing that people will, take great care of their car. They'll know everything about, their electronics, but they don't pay any. They won't even read a label of what they're eating.
Well, and I say to people, would you put contaminated gasoline in the tank of your car? No. Well, why are you putting contaminants inside your own tank?
Yeah.
I remember way back when, in the 80s, at a conference, a friend of mine stood up and basically just read the Riot Act about sugar.
Yeah, people really don't realize.
And then you've got, once again, this is not so much an accusatory statement, but one that is a fact, is that a lot of the research that was done and the promotion for sugar was done by the sugar industry.
Absolutely.
And this happens all the time. The people who are producing it contrive to produce data that justifies their existence.
Yeah.
As we say, data can be tortured to confess to anything.
That's right.
So I'm saying that what we put inside our system, not just the food, it's how I think. If I see you as my enemy and I actually loathe you or hate you or just want to do something to you that is not kind and helpful, then what I've done inside the greater body of my humanity, I've created disharmony. I've created dis-ease. I'm not at ease with you.
Yeah.
If I'm not at ease with you, we have a diseased body.
Right.
And we're living inside a diseased body. So how do we build world health? And we're not talking about the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
That's an interesting, the WHO.
Yeah.
The World Health
also
Organization.
An interesting oxymoron. They don't seem to be really concerned with world health. But that's a whole different topic. But but it's a good subject though, because we have a tendency, and this is something that I've noticed. Americans are the teenagers of Western civilization. We have a tendency to have blind spots that maybe older organizations, old countries have a little more. I think I would call it institutional skepticism. So if you go to Eastern European countries, there's a little bit more of a baked-in skepticism to something, whereas we have more of a baked-in optimism to some things. So sometimes we're easily fooled by someone will just say World Health Organization, and we think that that's what it means. But and in the same way that you were alluding to earlier with the sugar industry, what we have here is corporate regulatory capture, where these corporations are able to capture the regulatory agencies by funding them. And so you start thinking about, so how do we measure the health? Where do we able to trust data from? And I think before anything, you have to get to the point where you're becoming super aware of your own biases and how you process information internally, how information hits you, how you feel it physically. And then you can start to create a baseline in which to approach these things.
Great. Do you remember at school the food pyramid?
Yes, I do, in fact. And one of the most heinous, absolute treacherous lies that were perpetrated on the world,
was the food pyramid.
Was the food pyramid.
So I think we're not on a rant here.
Yeah.
we're on a journey. I've seen, for instance, cultures like China. I've been in China. I've been in India many times. when I eat Indian food, when I eat good Chinese food, when I eat Japanese food, it's so nutritious, it's so healthy, it's so balanced.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the destruction of a culture through the introduction of food that is not indigenous to them.
Yeah, that's important. But
I mean, that's where I go back to certain fast food chains, and then it becomes the fad. It becomes the thing to do to become copy Western. And what they're doing is they're bringing disease into their own culture.
Yeah.
And we've seen this where a nation suddenly has a health problem because their diet has been changed. The chain has been broken. I remember back in the 80s when I was in India with a colleague, we were organizing a World Wilderness Congress, and we wanted delegates from India. And we went to visit one professor in Bangalore. And he wasn't very friendly. And we went, well, what's the problem? He said, look, I am tired of Westerners coming and trying to tell us what to do. I am dealing with a broken chain. I'm dealing with farmers that do not understand what their grandparents did. All they know is they got to buy tractors, they got to buy fertilizers, whether it's built or produced in Bhopal, which had this incredible tragic accident. And he said, I am trying to repair the natural chain that got broken by the introduction of that which was not healthy for us.
Yeah.
So whether that's hamburgers in Hong Kong or fertilizers in India or wherever, it's what we've done is we've created an industry. That industry generates money. We measure the health of our nation by its gross domestic product, which means that the more we sell of this stuff, the richer we become. Therefore, we believe that we are in better shape. We are not. It's a false reading.
Yeah.
How do you take the true reading? I go back to this person I met and had a lot of respect for, Manfred Max Neef. I can walk down any street in any city and tell you the health of a nation by looking into the eyes of the people. I mean, oh God, what a simple way of doing it. Are they afraid? Are they joyful? Are they happy with life? Can they hear the birds sing? Are they cowering in fear? It's you're reading the signs. What we've got at the moment is symptoms of disease, and we don't understand that these are symptoms.
Yeah.
I'd like us to tread very gently and carefully on some eggshells now.
Yeah.
Let's take the USA, for instance.
Sure.
What's the state of health of our nation at the moment? And when I say our nation, for those who hear my British accent, I was born in England. I'm American by choice, not by birth. I've been an American for the past 30 years. And so I'm speaking from a place of being part of this nation, being part of its fabric. So how do we evaluate the state of health? If we look through the political lens, it's pretty scary because we've broken politics down into party politics. And let me just step back a while here. In a couple of podcasts ago, we talked about the soul of nations. And we looked at the soul ray of a nation and the personality ray of a nation. We looked at the USA having a second ray soul, which is the ray of love, wisdom. It's really a good-hearted being that is benevolent and cares about people. Its sixth ray is the ray of idealism and devotion, which actually can be very useful when it's in its positive aspect, because it means that we are true to our ideals. We are true to our ideals. When it goes bad, when it goes negative, when it goes on the dark side, the sixth ray of idealism and devotion turns to fanaticism, where the faction is held to be the whole. So you've got a fraction or the faction trying to represent the whole or trying to make the whole be like itself. So if this party gets in, we're going to change everything. If this party gets in, we're going to change everything. It's going to look like us.
Mm.
Because we don't have a deep understanding of what the deep ideal of the soul is. We're responding to the addictions and unredeemed aspects, as you mentioned earlier, of our personality. So it's a very tricky situation, particularly when you look at Russia and America or the USA, because both countries have a sixth ray personality, which means that both have a tendency for idealism and going for something, grand and noble. But when the countries are in their lower aspect of their personality, they're fanatical, they're oppressive, they are vitriolic. And I think what we're seeing now, without going into the details of who said what to whom, but we're seeing stuff come out from the body. We're seeing poisons coming to the surface. We're seeing symptoms of whether it's sexism, whether it's misogyny, whether it's racism, no matter who's perpetrating it, this is coming from our common body. And therefore, you could say, oh my God, what's happening? Or you can say, this is a health crisis. It's showing us unless we change, we're going to die of poisoning. And we're the people, we've poisoned ourselves. It's national suicide through poisoning.
Right. Yeah, we're all sitting in the same aquarium, so we have to, it's a kind of a crude idea, but if you're not maintaining the health of the aquarium, we're all going to choke to death in it. So.
Well, and so, because here at Meditation Mount, we're a non-profit, we're spiritual, we're educational. We do have views about principles and ideals, but they're not embedded into a political party. We've said this on the podcast before, that you could look at politics at the meta level. Politics is simply the way in which we choose to live together and govern ourselves.
That's right.
It's a first-ray aspect of of humanity, because it has to do with governance, with direction, with being on purpose. So how do you fulfill a purpose of a nation or yourself? By organizing yourself. How do you organize Joey? Well, you get your act together, you line up. How do you organize a nation? Well, when we do it through politics, we have elections, and we vote on how we choose to live together and govern ourselves.
Yeah.
But then that descends into this tribal warfare and becomes this sort of fanatical interaction where we're just hurling poisonous substances at each other by way of thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
I think all parties to this have responsibility. We're not singling out anyone. So where we stand here at Meditation Mount is that we believe that a new order, a new world can be created on these three principles and these three pathways. So if we look at the state of a nation or the health of the world and these three principles, let's draw some parallels, Joey, if we can. We have the principle of essential divinity that says each person is created in the image and likeness of the Creator. Inside of the heart of each person is a spark of this sacred flame of the one life, by whatever name you call it. Therefore, each of us is a sacred part of nature. Each of us is to be respected and cared for and honored. Then we have the principle of goodwill that says love is the lifeblood of the body of our humanity. It's the glue that holds us together. If the lifeblood of love does not flow around the body of our one humanity, we're going to die. We're not going to maintain health. And then we have the principle of unanimity that says we're all part of one seamless system. Everything is one. We're not here to try and prove the unified field theory. According to the principle of unanimity, we're here to live the unified field fact.
Yeah.
So if you look at these essential divinity, goodwill, unanimity, now we could choose others, but we've been given the assignment to bring these into the world. And you can see that this is a way of recreating wholeness and health, because that's what health means, is wholeness. To be hale and hearty. That was an old English expression. Hale comes from the Scandinavian to be whole, heal.
Mm.
And it's so being healthy means to being whole. It's as simple as that. Therefore, the only way you can be whole is to make sure all the parts are joined together. So when you have separatist thinking and when you have parties and people insulting each other, denigrating each other, what do you think that does to the whole body of our nation?
Mm-hmm.
It's deconstructing the connective tissue. So love is the connective tissue. If there isn't love and respect, we don't have a nation that is a union. We don't have this striving towards a more perfect union. And a disunion is a diseased body.
That's right.
And that's what we've got. So it's no blame. It's a wake-up call. So the question is, what do we do about it? And as you said, Joe, you start with yourself. You start with your family. You start with your community, those around you, and you build from the inside out.
Yeah. Because that's really, there's very few people actually that can just instantly snap their fingers and move the needle in one direction or other. So, but you'd be surprised what you can do, especially in your own daily life. You'll see so much great feedback, positive feedback, real world results if you start working on the one place that you have control over, and that's you.
And then you have those people who can intervene at a macro level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of someone like Taylor Swift.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Regardless of what any ideology but she's a person that is living her life to the best of her ability, trying to find out what love means, what being kind means, what being inclusive. And people are attracted to her because it's a message that's needed for the whole body. So there's an example of somebody who is representing a call to wholeness. Mm-hmm. Just look at all the Eras tour that she's been doing around the world. Mm-hmm. All the young people coming there. It's not just because of the music. It's because they feel a togetherness. Mm-hmm. They feel a wholeness together, being part of this congregation. They are congregating. Mm-hmm. They are gathering around music, around a message, around a sense of, hey, we're sisters and brothers. And therefore, it is a call to wholeness. Mm. It's beyond just, this is this great musical tour. Mm. I see this as the new generation responding, just as my generation responded to Woodstock and the Glastonbury Festival, the Isle of Wight. And I was at the first Glastonbury Festival in the mud with 300,000 other people experiencing, oh my God, this new togetherness. Mm-hmm. It's for real.
It is. It is together. Yeah.
So I believe that the road to wholeness, as you said, Joey, starts with ourselves, with the stewardship of our own system. Mm-hmm. What are the other points that you believe are important in this conversation?
Well, I think staying on that kind of same topic, that I think the most important work you can do, especially right now, if you are someone living in North America and you are listening to this podcast, which is the majority of our listeners, is examining and understanding your own biases. If you think about just about the fuel sensor in your car, or if you have an electric car, your battery sensor. If that one piece of gear is miscalculated or malfunctioning, your entire read of your system is going to be off. You're going to find yourself out of gas on the highway, or you're going to find you get up to morning to go to work and your car is not going to be charged. It is the single point of failure. And for humans, that is a set of code called our biases. And if your biases are not calibrated right, or let's just say you can have really strong biases, and if you're not aware of them, and you're not aware that you're coloring all the data that comes in, you think, I'm doing my best, I'm watching the news, I'm getting multiple sources, but you're not realizing that you're filtering that all through your own personal bias.
It's interesting with the bias, because the biases are leaning to one side or the other.
Right.
And I know what you've just reminded me of was a very dramatic situation back up in the Scottish Highlands in the winter. Mm-hmm. Oh God, I can feel it in my body. In the mid or late 1970s.
Okay.
where a friend and I were leading a group of people up on the Cairngorm Plateau, and there was a whiteout. It was snowy.
Mm-hmm.
And about a mile away was the site where a few years earlier a party of school children had died because they got caught out. It's pretty wild conditions out there.
Yeah, that's...
And we had this whiteout, and we didn't know where we were. We were navigating by a compass bearing alone. And I realized the importance of navigation, of following the true bearing. And then what happened for about half a minute, the clouds started to disperse, the snow stopped, and my friend and I saw what we thought was the mountain we're looking for. Oh, right, there's this mountain, we're heading this way. About 30 seconds later, we bumped into a big snowy hill, a little hillock.
Mm-hmm.
What we thought was a mountain was in fact like a 10-foot mound covered in snow. Our perspective was totally off.
Mm-hmm.
We had miscalculated. And what I've noticed when I was leading groups in the mountains, over 100 yards, over half a mile, be half a degree off is okay. Mm-hmm. You know, you can see it, and normally you have line of sight.
That's right.
If you are a degree off over miles and miles, you could be the wrong side of a ravine.
That's right.
And so what does it mean to not have biases? It means to stay true.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is a compass bearing? Whether it's a moral compass, whatever compass it is, it's you're lining up to something that is saying, this is the direction. If you follow this, you will stay on course. Mm-hmm. And as we said in a recent podcast, justice is equivalent to truth, and truth is being true. So when you are living a just life, you are living a life that is true to your deep principles, your deep ideals. You are living a just life, and that's what justice is. It's the process by which we are seeking to maintain that we are aligned with truth. And when you're out of alignment, we say you've broken the law, or there's or there could be a miscarriage of justice. Justice means being aligned with truth, with that north. And therefore, we have to make readjustments. And we named this before, to adjust. Ad is, in Latin, is to, or towards. Just is the true. So an adjustment is a movement towards the truth. So what we need in our society is an adjustment, a moral, ethical, principled adjustment from the heart that says, let's get back on track together. Let's get back on course, because if we're off course, we're not going to be in integrity. And if we're not in integrity with ourselves, we are not living in wholeness. And if wholeness is not present in a system, there is always disease. So it goes back to this thing, Joey, is from the micro to the macro, the whole thing is about the right circulation of energy freely around a system. It's the hallmark of health, is right circulation. And you look at Qigong, you look at all the martial arts, you look at...
Or just look at what happens when you eat too much sugar and you start to get diabetes in your legs. You're not getting, you're not getting that circulation. I mean, like it becomes apparent right away. If you're not circulating, you're in trouble.
So we go back to what is the thing that really brings, if you like, happiness or joy to the body of our humanity? What is it that needs to be circulated? Well, we go back to love. The circulation of love produces a sense of joy and a sense of well-being and a sense of just gratitude. And like, we're in this together. When we don't have that, and when we see separation, and when we see somebody else being the enemy, when I want to either convince them to change their way of view, or I want to kill them, whether I'm launching a drone and killing them, because I'm still locked into a cycle of revenge and thinking this will balance things out. If we kill this leader, it'll balance things out. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If you follow that, you will have a blind and toothless world, as sort of paraphrasing what Gandhi was saying.
Yeah.
So you've already said to listeners, here's some things you can do. What's the one thing that you did in your life that put you back on this on the road to wholeness, or the road to healing, the road to health, the road to happiness?
Yeah. For me, the big change was realizing at a point where this was when Kelly and I were living in different cities, and we were still helping each other out, and just when something came up, and I was so upset at her about something, and then I realized what was my part in this. Like when you finally realize, and this does have to do with moving from a victim mentality to really becoming manifested and seated in your own self. And I realized, wow, I've been spending my entire life blaming other people and not realizing what was my part in it. And when you do that, you don't honor your own intelligence, your own autonomy, your own, and I wasn't doing that. I wasn't honoring that. And it would create a deficiency in myself. And like, I didn't have the terminology for it then, but I realized now I was burning too much energy in one place and not balancing it. So using all this energy and all this intellect and all this ability to sort of map out these deep thesis and like just deep territory of blame on other people without taking any responsibility at all for what my part was in.
Well, and I would say I'm seeing symptoms of that inside our society at the moment.
Right.
The blame game is 100%. Rampant.
Yeah. Without taking even a moment to say, well, what could I have done differently? What was my part? How did I contribute to this? And when you do that, first of all, it rocks your world a little bit, because when you really start to see it, you're like, oh, I really was doing that. And you ultimately, at the very bottom, it's a process of you're no longer lying to yourself,
And once you've gotten over, oh my God, I'm a bad person. Oh my God, how can I face my health? How am I going to repair, redeem? What's reparation?
That's important, because that's a big deal, because you can have that thing. You start thinking of yourself as a bad person, or I did all these things, and that's where I came up with this little idea called moving from unskilled to skilled. And if you just look at it like that, I didn't have the tools. I was unskilled at this thing, and how do you move from unskilled to skilled? Well, you make mistakes. You realize you have to learn some things, and as you develop these tools and develop these skills, you become better at it. So, again, I didn't have this was over a process of many years. It wasn't something I just knew inherently, and I didn't have the terminology for it. But I can look back and say, from that point to now, I moved from being unskilled to having some skills.
Your movement from unskilled to skilled required a choice.
Absolutely. Sometimes on a daily and hourly basis.
What I am observing now, there is not even a recognition of what has caused the current malaise, or that I am part of the malaise. There's this blame. No, the sickness in our society is caused by you, your religion, your politics, your this, your that, rather than saying, hey, what have we got ourselves into? What have we created here together, and how do we get out of this?
Right.
And I think very astute what you've just said, because you're talking about it's not just enough to be intelligent. There's this whole movement from smart to wise, and we've named this before, that wisdom is the application of intelligence in service of the good of the whole. Therefore, the strength of the mind has to be placed inside the goodness and the strength of the heart. And that combo creates health. But unless I acknowledge that, hey, I'm part of what caused it, then I'm in the blame game. There's no way I can break the cycle if I don't see myself as an instigator of something, as a causal. It goes back to if I don't see myself as causal, I then see my life as an effect of what other people have done to me, i.e. what you called a victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, we're all causal agents. What are we causing together by how we think and how we speak, how we show up? So the health of a nation really is determined by how each of us, each day, shows up fully and seeks to line up and navigate from a place of deep integrity, which is our inner values, and how we then see the other person as another way of life, seeking to build a greater version of what I'm seeking to create, which is not just individual happiness, but collective well-being.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When you were saying that, I was just thinking how, for me, like what's one of the little things I noticed, and early in my recovery, when I was going to a lot of meetings every day, and it's basically all I could really do in terms of health. But I was living in Vegas, and I didn't have a car, so I was either taking the bus or getting rides. And I started to observe this phenomenon for how someone might be in a meeting. They seemed very, very philosophic, very centered, very deep, and then you get a ride home from them, and it developed what I call the traffic test. And that's where you see how centered you are. How is when someone cuts you off in traffic or something, and then what's your reaction? And I was like, wow, these people and one of them who was my first sponsor, and I was like, wow, this person is not grounded at all. This person isn't living any of these things that they're saying. It's just all a big fiction. They're putting on a performance, and then you get out there, and one little person cuts you off. Not even a chance of hitting you. Just moved over. They even used their blinker, and like you are screaming. Like all of a sudden now you're a racist. It's like, wow, that came out quick. And I think that's something we don't realize about ourselves is like when the temperature gets turned up a little bit, how do you react?
And the temperature on the planet is being turned up. Therefore, we're getting collective road rage throughout society, not just on the freeways.
Yes.
But we're seeing road rage in politics.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing road rage everywhere.
Well, it's a bit of a sport, really. It seems like it's sort of celebrated. So it's interesting what we celebrate and what we canonize. So people who have the greatest rage about anything seem to be where we like to put our attention right now. So. I mean, like it, and that crosses all socio-economical, political. It doesn't matter if you're in the right, left, gay, straight, black, white. Who is ever the most outraged and most outrageous is where we're like moths to a flame. And I don't know if that's. I don't know. I hypothesize that is pretty much part of human nature. Is that you tend to attracted naturally to a lot of energy, whatever the energy is. But that's where your understanding of bias and your self-realization comes in.
Well, it goes back to what you said about the unredeemed aspect. The unredeemed aspects are still magnetic.
Yeah.
They attract to us more things that strengthen them. That's why until you've broken through an addiction, you can't just get out of addiction by saying, I think tomorrow I'll stop. It is a major choice. Yeah. It's an act of will. And an act of will cuts through previous patterns and previous imprinting. And it's said that you can't break a pattern until a greater patterning happens in your life, which is why in the recovery program, there's a lot of it's tied to a spiritual journey as well.
Right. And also you being in action. I think that's, if you boil it down to something, you have to be in action. So it's not just enough to stop one action. You have to create new positive actions.
Well, and that's where we say, stop poisoning yourself. Yeah. But health is not just a question of stop poisoning yourself. How do we then put into our body nutrients that are going to create health for ourselves and others? Well, that means being joyful, being gracious, being grateful, being kind. Goes back to the Buddhist saying, only think, say, and do that which is kind, helpful, and true. That's a panacea.
Yeah, I think of those two, I think the one that you can, if this is a new concept to you, if this is something you're struggling with, one of the most workable kind of subjects in there or tools in there is the subject of gratitude. Because even if you're at your most depressed or you're most angry, or if you take the action starting to say, like, find these things that you're like, say, am I grateful for, even if it's so you think it's insignificant. But I love like this statistic that you're in the 1% of the world population if you make around, I think it's around $37,000 a year. That means you're in the 1% of the entire planet. So it's like, oh wow, when you start to think about that, you're like, oh wow. If I start my gratitude from there, that I have fresh water. I mean, you can start simple. I have fresh water. I have, a car. I have anything, and you realize, wow, we really live in kind of a rarefied time. It's an interesting thing if you really are trying to grasp for things you really don't understand. But recently, our fellow Mountie Kelly had a surgery, and I was visiting her in the hospital. And there's always that plaque in the hospital where you see in American hospitals say that in the event of emergency, you cannot be refused treatment. That is an amazing concept. That is a very Western kind of this litigious kind of thing that you wouldn't think would exist in such a capitalist country. But it turns out we said, hey, if someone's having an emergency, you can't refuse them treatment. That's not something that existed even 50, 60, 70 years ago. That was something that, we live in a time that is both uniquely crazy. It's disparate. There's a lot of disunion, but there's also some positive things. You can look up just about anything you want in the terms of human history. So I don't want to be a complete pessimist, but if you take it all back down to gratitude and just start right there. I am grateful. What am I grateful for in this moment? It will shift your entire energy.
Well, just look at what gratitude is. Gratitude is opening your heart and saying thank you for the gifts. That means something beyond myself, something that's been given to me that benefits me. It opens the channels for life to flow.
Right.
If I'm not grateful, I constrict. A constricted artery, a constricted channel in my body, whether it could be part of my whatever system inside my body gets constricted, I'm going to have problems. It goes back to the free and right circulation of energy around a system is the hallmark of health. Therefore, I think the health of the world is in our hands. And if we die, then the next society that is born out of the ashes of this death is going to have some inherited and pre-existing conditions. They're going to have the unredeemed aspects as part of the body, just as we have. We come in with family predispositions because these are things that are still carried on generation to generation that haven't been redeemed.
Right.
And at some point they are.
Yeah.
So how do you break the cycle? Break the cycle of revenge. It isn't just breaking the cycle of revenge. Once you stop being vengeful, how do you behave? Loving kindness.
Yeah.
Loving kindness is what you do once you've gotten over the addiction to vengeance.
Yeah. It's a definite sea change in thinking and energy.
Well, I know we put a lot of stuff out there today, and it has to be named because we've talked about this before. The only way to address something is to name it, acknowledge it, and then take responsibility for it.
That's right.
And each of us has to do that ourselves.
Yeah.
But just by voicing it, whether it's on this podcast or other podcasts or in conversations with friends and family, just the fact that we're saying, hey, let's get healthy together. What does that look like?
I love that idea. Let's get healthy together.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joey.
All right.
Good health to you.
Good health. Salute.